I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the unceded Gadigal and Wurundjeri lands that we live and work on. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future, recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' ongoing connections to land, skies and waterways. And when thinking about educative practices, which is the focus of this podcast, this is not a new concept, and it's important to acknowledge the 65,000 years of educative practices that have taken place on these lands. Welcome to this episode of the Educative Evidence Based Practices podcast. In this series, we'll share emerging themes, developments and discussions about EEBP. In this episode, we'll provide an introduction to the EEBP framework, particularly for those of you who might be new to it. First, a little bit of background. In the Australian context, we currently have a variety of state-based and national education policies with evidence-based practice recommendations. This often involves a particular version of explicit teaching with a narrow conception of evidence and a one-size-fits-all approach. The overgeneralisation and oversimplification of research findings is contested by education researchers. However, this isn't much help to teachers when these policies are operationalised in schools and teachers can feel they lack agency and are tasked with carrying out particular strategies without regard for context, students, or their particular subject or discipline, which in our case is music. While the evidence-based practices currently espoused in policy are a good idea for learning and teaching some of the time, we wonder how they are supposed to work with all aspects of the music curriculum. If you're also wondering these sorts of things, EEBP might provide some answers. It's a specific approach to evidence-based practices in education based on a medical model of evidence-based practice, and it is being tested by researchers and teachers at the moment, specifically in music education. To help you use the EEBP framework in your planning as a tool for reflection or as a tool for advocacy, in this podcast I will explain a bit about the circles and the framework so that you can get started using the model right away. Brad investigated evidence-based practice in medicine, which revealed significant contrasts with its application in education. In this model of EBP, health professionals must also consider patient values, circumstances and preferences, their clinical expertise and the practice context. Brad theorised that if the practitioner was replaced with the teacher and the patient with the student, the medical model of EBP could still work in education, which we've done in the following quote. Evidence-based practice is not just about using research evidence, but also about valuing and using the education, skills and experience that you have as a teacher. Furthermore, it is also about considering each student's situation and values when making a decision, as well as considering characteristics of the classroom context, for example, the resources available in which you are interacting with each student. In the medical model, practitioners integrate information from each of the circles using clinical or professional reasoning. This refers to the thinking processes underpinning practice. Turpin and Hicks state, and I quote, that professionals need to use their clinical or professional reasoning to gather and interpret different types of information from a range of sources and combine it with their existing knowledge base to make judgments and decisions regarding complex situations under conditions of uncertainty. And a classroom is certainly a complex situation with conditions of uncertainty. Brad theorised clinical reasoning for education as pedagogical reasoning, guided by the foundational principle of educative teaching and learning, which means centering the care, growth, and positive transformation of students as persons at the centre of every music learning and teaching situation. The Educative Evidence-Based Practices framework involves using pedagogical reasoning. In education, pedagogical reasoning has been defined as the thinking that underpins informed professional practice, which aligns with the definition from health of professional reasoning shared earlier. Pedagogical reasoning sees expert pedagogues positioned as skillful and thoughtful practitioners who are informed by a knowledge base and are responsive to the diversity of learning needs. We've defined educative and pedagogical reasoning. Now let's unpack each of the circles briefly, starting with the student. The student circle refers to the values, preferences, circumstances, and disciplinary expertise of each student, which is linked to their identity. And this has implications for student agency and inclusion. Students bring a wide range of musical tastes and prior music learning experiences to any learning and teaching situation. Some students might have learned to play music formally or informally with their family or friends outside of school. Most, if not all students, have a well-developed musical identity primarily through listening. This is at all levels of education, including early childhood. All of this impacts their belonging, connectedness, and inclusion in school music. A strengths-based viewpoint found in the culturally responsive pedagogy literature positions students as capable and agentic. Students are seen as active participants in the classroom environment, and their cultural backgrounds and life experiences are assets which they are empowered to use. The teacher incorporates their pedagogical expertise, disciplinary expertise, values, preferences, and circumstances. The pluralisation of practices in the title of EEBP acknowledges the diversity and plurality of practice that music teachers bring with them to the classroom. Teachers bring with them their own musical backgrounds and values and ways of learning associated with those backgrounds. Music teachers in Australia tend to come from predominantly white backgrounds and Western art or classical music backgrounds. The values associated with art music can result in othering the values, needs, and circumstances of the students. Music teachers, like all teachers, need to reflect on and address their own assumptions, biases, privilege, race, and racism to avoid reproducing systemic inequities in education and instead ensuring that classrooms are safer or educative for all students, and that the care, growth, and positive transformation of students is possible. Much research has shown that the disconnect between teachers' musical values and ways of knowing, being, and doing, and the musical cultures that their students are already engaged in, is one of the reasons that children and young people fail to stay engaged in school music education once it becomes elective. We have a strong evidence base of over 50 years of discipline-specific music education research, both about pedagogy and as the foundation of national and state-based curricula, both in Australia and globally. Perhaps the most fundamental principle is sound before sign pedagogy, the idea that students always need an oral context before introducing any abstract concept. Another way of putting this is, we do the thing before we name it. In the last 20 years, several pedagogical approaches have emerged from music education research that highlight the importance of a pedagogical toolkit and adopting different approaches for different situations. For example, popular music pedagogies such as Lucy Green's informal learning and electronic music pedagogy. Importantly, musically and culturally specific approaches for learning and teaching Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledges through music and the learning and teaching of culturally diverse musics are vitally important to support the teaching of musics and cultures in a respectful, meaningful, and appropriate manner. Of course, explicit teaching following an I do, we do, you do model is useful in many music education learning and teaching situations too. There is also a strong evidence base for project-based learning and inquiry learning for teaching creative and critical thinking, which are vital for creative music-making practices such as composing and improvising, which are a significant part of music curricula globally. The classroom context refers to the broader institutional and societal context as well as the classroom itself and the physical space, equipment, and resources available, including instruments and digital technologies. So where next for the EEBP framework? To date, it has been operationalised as a tool for reflection. It is beginning to be used as a tool for planning, and it's also useful as a tool for advocacy.